Thank you for those kind words, Lee. I have a microphone on, which, Steve, are you okay? Because I move everywhere. You're good? Okay, great. I'll talk very loudly. If you can't hear me, let me know, and I'll adjust my volume. Very interactive, usually when I speak, so I have a lot of people that are going to help me tonight, I hope. So far, I've had Nancy back there in the orange, beautiful colored orange shirt, passing out some interesting paper spoons for you, and because you have those paper spoons, you will be rewarded. I brought honey all the way from Italy for you to try tonight, so if you're interested in trying some honey from Italy, I can definitely satisfy your needs. Who wants to take notes on the batch of mead we're making tonight? Anybody? You saw your hand first. What's your name? Lee. Lee? Okay. If we don't get this blue tape back in Sharpie later, let me know, because Lee has it now.
Now, how am I going to take notes on this and not on a piece of paper?
I'll give you a book and an example. And an example. So I brought 5 books. We're going to pass them all around. If you keep it, I will know. I will find you. My name is probably in it.
She knows where you live.
So you'll feel guilty at some point. Just kidding. If you really want the book, keep the book. I'll get another one. So, but on the front cover of this book, and this is a really good book to get. If I was going to say get one book, talk louder. Louder. Is this better? Okay, if I was going to buy one book, oh no, I have to wear this and use that?
Looks like, oh, wait a minute.
I'm very interactive. If I'm well behaved, can I put this down for a little bit?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to put it right here. If I was to buy one book, I would get The Complete Mead Maker by Ken Schramm. Anybody want to second that? 2 hands up. Anybody have this book? It's an awesome book. Really? Come on. Oh, you can't find it. You have one. Okay.
I can't find it. It's in the
It's very accessible on the internet. You can find this book easily. It's not terribly expensive. It is an excellent resource, and it's really complete. So if you're a beginner and or you've already been making mead, there's definitely something in here for you. I've read it about 25 times. You'll see all kinds of messes in here. It's actually in pretty good shape compared to some of my books, which look really bad. But the example that Lee asked me for to show you is the tape on the front. So the tape on the front is me taking notes when I made a batch of mead. Because if you don't take notes and it's really good and you don't have a good memory for things, you'll wonder what you did. And this is a good way to keep track. So Sharpie, tape, book for you. Actually, can I pass this one around and give you a different book? Does anybody have a clipboard or a little notepad that Lee can use? Okay. First interactive experience coming around.
Now, am I gonna take notes while you're doing stuff?
Yeah, you just write.
So all you're going to be writing on the tape is today's date.
Okay.
Mead, PBBKA, however you say that. There you go. The yeast, the honey, how much of it, and then what size batch we're making, and we may throw another thing or two at you, like blueberries or.
You just write. You can just.
Yep. You
can write it right on the roll.
Okay. So.
Right now, how many drinking?
So mead is an ancient beverage, so we'll get into the slideshow. I'm really bad at slides. Usually I stay on this first slide for like a half hour, and then I go through all of them in like 2 seconds. Does this work? Can somebody help me with the little clicker thing?
Lee?
That's the one. I don't think that's the one for that.
Okay. Well, whatever I need, and or I'll walk over there. While we're getting situated, I already reconstituted the yeast that we're going to use tonight. So mead is a beverage made simply with water and honey. It really doesn't require any other additional ingredients. However, if you'd like to help it along, you can follow a recipe. And I recommend doing that, especially in the beginning if you've never made mead before, because the things that you use will help you get a feel for how mead, basically how the brewing process takes place, and you'll have a lot of fun experiences with pros and cons, good things, bad things, and as you take notes and experiment, you can expand your experience to not using yeast, adding other ingredients. But in the beginning, unlike my normal way of doing things, like recipes, I don't use them when I cook at all. Hardly ever. But if I've never made it before, I usually use a recipe. So for this batch, we're actually going to use an already prepared yeast, and the brand is Lavalin, and I'm going to pass this one around. So this is a stable, dry yeast that when reconstituted becomes alive and can interact with sugars and convert them very nicely into alcohol, which is what we want. So we used a Lavalin D47. So when you get this yeast, this is another really tolerant, excellent yeast for beginners. So you might want to write this one down too.
One package?
Okay, we used 3/4 of a package for a gallon batch. You don't quite need a full pack, but save that quarter that's left, because if this doesn't get going, you'll be able to give it a little boost. So we used D47. It's a very tolerant yeast. It works really nicely where we live. It handles our high temperature and humidity really, really well. And it's very, very forgiving. So it'll handle the sugars in the honey, it'll convert them all into alcohol, and it usually does its job in a reasonable amount of time. Question? Yes, it is still a Saccharomyces, but it's not the same. And people who produce yeasts for brewing, it's a science, it's an art, there's a lot going on there. Again, imagine a lot of this is in nature, because mead's been around for a lot longer than people have been preparing yeast in labs. But this is the next best thing if you're not able to imitate that with ingredients that you source from nature. So you can do it any way you like, but just to be on the safe side, we're going to rely on a recipe and this stuff. This second one I like a lot too, and you'll find both of these yeasts in the Complete Mead Maker. This is a Lavalin 2. It's 71B, and they've shortened it. It used to be 71B 1122. But I think everybody said what I said, and I can't remember that, so we're going to shorten it to 71B. So that's coming around now too. Take a look at that. So I'm going to show you this now, because hopefully it changes. I reconstituted it with some water. I didn't measure. I used almost a cup of water. We're making a gallon of mead, and I put a little bit of honey in there, and the water is wrist temperature, like you're feeding a baby a bottle. It's a little bit, it's like your temperature basically. So I did prepare hot water, and I used room temperature. The big thing to remember is not to put the boiling hot water in with the yeast. So measure room temperature water and a hot water till you get your desired temperature. Pour your yeast in, stir it, add a little honey. There's a couple of other things you can do to really enhance your mead making, so I'll share a little bit of 102 tips, but not too much. Malt, like you would use to brew beer, is an excellent thing to feed yeast. So are any other sugars, sorghum, molasses you can use. And the other thing you can do with yeast is you can prepare your yeast in advance. We're making it right before we make our mead, and that's completely fine. But you can do this 24, 48, or even longer than that, and make basically what's called a starter. And what you're doing is you're not only awakening the dormant yeast, you're feeding it, and you're growing them. And in the Complete Mead Maker, if you read it from cover to cover 80 times like I did, eventually you'll come across the sentence that says, some people prefer to use yeast that's hungry once it gets into the batch. So there's a little bit of a timing element with the yeast where it's starting to eat, but it's not saturated, kind of like our bees when they swarm. They're like, you know, they're full, and they're trying to get to their destination. So we want this yeast to be a little hungry when it gets into the carboy. So we're going to see if this starts to bubble up a little bit for us before we use it.
So how do you make it hungry?
So you feed it, but you time it. So you use a little bit of time. I mixed it very gently till it dissolved. About 20 minutes. Yeah, 15, yeah. So it's milky and dissolved, but it hasn't gotten foamy. Now, if this got foamy all the way up to here, I would feel like it ate all of its food. If it was just a little bit of foam on top, then I would feel like, okay, it started eating, but it's not full yet. I'll be able to put it into my mead. So I just went to Italy a couple of weeks ago, and it was really awesome. And I ate a ton of salami and ham and cheese and vinegar and Parmesan cheese. And it has absolutely nothing to do with mead. But I didn't get this picture in the slideshow, but I really want you to see it, so I'm going to pass my phone around. If my phone goes dormant, try really hard to get it to recognize your face, because I'd really like to find out if anybody could like fail my Face ID thing. And if so, I want to like do the Snapchat face switch thing with you and see if we look alike or something to that effect. But Anyway, if you need to get my phone active again, just let me know. You can look at a couple more pictures if you want, but don't swipe too far because you might see something I don't want you to see. I'm just kidding. Here's the plate of salamis and mortadellas and all that stuff. I went to Bologna. And I went to Bologna because this is going to be a segue into, I'm not going to talk about meat as much as you want, I'm sorry, but I'll do my best. I have all kinds of other things to bring to you. These are 3 honeys that I got from a beekeeper in Bologna that I met last year. I went to Turin in Italy in September for a slow food international event called Terra Madre. And Slow Food is a really cool organization. They have an entire network for beekeepers all over the world. I met people that beekeep and climb cliffs in the Himalayas and check out Apis dorsata, and lots of cool people from Brazil with Apis melliponia. It was really fun. I had such a good time. You should all go. So Raffaella, this gentleman, is part of, he's also a researcher with Colas, really nice guy. He's part of a program in Italy that's called a honey sensory analysis. And they actually have a national honey registry there because they actually test all their honeys. I know that sounds crazy, but it's so cool. If you produce a single source honey here in the United States, it's usually something that you know because you placed your bees on 500 acres of saw palmetto that was active and pine trees and really nothing else. So you're pretty much going to guarantee that it's mostly a single source honey, maybe with some pollens from other things. But these honeys were all tested, and I brought 3 for you to taste, and they're all drastically different. If you haven't seen them all together, I'm going to try really hard to hold these up without dropping them on the floor, but I don't know if I can do this.
You want the lights on now?
If you want. So we have on the left a dark amber translucent honey because it's liquid in liquid state, and in the center we have a nice opaque, super fine and crystallized honey, and then on the right we have one that's a little darker and it's partially crystallized and partially liquefied. And I'm going to tell you about all 3 of them, and I'm going to pass the first one around now for you to taste, and I'll tell you what it is. And this is to keep you from falling asleep. I'm going to get you all hopped up on sugar. So this is G1, which is a summer polyfloral, likely containing sunflower and alfalfa. And we tasted 18 single source honeys for 4 days for 8 hours a day until we knew what they all were. And then, here's where the humility comes in. And then they started mixing the single source honeys with other honeys in small quantities and tested us, and none of us could figure out what the single source honey was. It was so hard trying to develop the olfactory senses to recognize the honeys. Now, since it was so hard, I have to do it. I have to rise to the challenge. Okay, so I'm going to pass this around. Usually I taste it before everybody else does, just to make sure it's okay. I just want to make sure it's good. And I only have one rule. Okay, I only have one rule: no double dipping. You promise? Everybody? Pinky promise? Okay. You're allowed to take a big spoonful, but don't double dip. Okay, here it is. And I'm going to give the lid to Nancy. That's really good. Okay. So, can we have the lights again for a couple minutes? Thanks. I'm going to make you guys work. So this is a nice gentleman I met at the National Honey Show in London in 2015. And we were in the mead room. Look at how happy I am. There were like 200 and something bottles of mead in that room. I was really excited. I've been to a lot of honey shows, and I've never seen that many bottles of mead all in one room. And I was so happy they let me in there. I ended up being a general steward because I was new to trying to steward a honey show of that size, and I had no idea what to even ask when I applied to help. And basically, I was allowed to guard the room. That was it. And I was like, that's fine, I'm good, just leave me in here. And then the actual mead judges came through. They had already judged all the classes. There were like 30 classes of mead. They do it by county, kind of like we have our local beekeepers associations here in the state. And then at the end, they took all the first place meads and tasted all of them. and they let me taste the winner. It was really good. So if you've never been to a honey show like that before, one of the reasons why I would include the slide is A, so you know about it, and so I would encourage you to try to go to something like that. Just look on the right side of the photo and see that awesome example of a hive typical for that region, made by a gentleman who was the manager at the time, Bill Fisher, and he said he made it the night before. I don't really believe him.
Is that plastic?
It's all beeswax. Thin sheets. And there was a light so you could see through it. It was meticulous. So I didn't believe him, but he seems like a pretty honest guy. So we'll see if we ever could find out. But he did win a prize for it. May I have the next slide, please? So there's one wall of Meads in that room. It was basically all around the whole inside circumference of the room. It was really spectacular. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so we talked a little bit about this. Mead is an ancient beverage. We're all Vikings, and that's why we like it. The end. So, just as grapes are able to have different qualities between varieties, mead flavors can vary depending on floral sources, fermentation ingredients, and conditions, and the bees themselves. So there's a lot of factors, and that's not all of it. That's just as much as I fit in there. So it's really a pretty diverse type of situation. Again, it can be very simple and very easy, as mixing honey and water and letting nature do its thing, or it can be very complex. And with your supplies, may I have the next slide? It can be the same. So here is a little bit about mead. It contains about 12 to 15 or more % of alcohol. Basically, the yeast is converting all the sugar into alcohol. So think for a second, I'm adding a ratio of honey to water based on a recipe or by what I like, ranging from wanting to end up with a dry or medium or sweet type mead. And the yeast is going to, if it does its job, and it can, convert it all into alcohol. Well, there's things you can do to increase the alcohol. Anybody want to guess what you can do? Add more sugar. You guys are all really smart.
Heat it up.
And heat it up a bit. There's all kinds of tricks. But basically, after your primary brew, if you add more honey to it, you can increase the alcohol and also the sweetness.
You have to add sometimes more yeast or no?
Not always, but sometimes. It just depends on how vigorous or how much fermentation you want.
If it gets going after you add the honey, then you're good. If it doesn't get going.
You have to be careful, because when yeast dies, it stays in there. If you don't get what is delicious sitting on top of the dead yeast off as quickly as possible, some of those flavors will end up in your mead. And they're not always pleasant. And that's the other also possibility when doing it naturally. So what's pretty good about following a recipe and using the yeast that we're using tonight is a lot of times these yeasts have been tested to do a certain thing, and then if you follow the instructions, you're likely to have a pretty good resulting batch of mead. If you do it naturally, you can have all kinds of cool microbes and yeasts and things coming in from the outer stratosphere, and that can affect everything. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's just a matter of what you enjoy and what you want your mead to taste like. I've had a lot of amazing spontaneous meads, and I do a lot of honey fermentation on purpose with with honeys that are high moisture, aged honeys, fruits that contain yeast on the skin, which if we're growing things well, a lot of fruits have natural yeasts on the outside of the skin, like grapes, and then even some vegetables have plenty of lactobacilli, good bacteria. So there's all kinds of really neat things, not to mention what's in the honey. And if there's a lot of pollen in there, what can happen? Can you go back one more second? Just if you haven't already read that, I just wanted to say there's so many different varieties. Basically, they consider mead just honey and water with or without the yeast. But once you start adding other things and or changing it, like heating the honey to a burnt-like texture, consistency as far as flavor, they have different names. So sizer, anybody want to guess what goes in sizer? Think cider. Apples. Piment, anybody? Grapes, excellent. Muslin, I have no idea. Anybody know? I put it in there, but I really don't know. Melomel is a fruit. And then there's braggot, which is basically like making beer and then aging it before you carbonate it or not carbonating it at all. And there's many more besides that. Hippocras, there's a whole bunch of them.
Did they distill it ever?
You can make a bochet and you can do a reduction on it, and it will be a very fine liqueur. So yeah, I mean, I would say yes to that. But I've had that happen with fermented honey that I reconstituted.
And we distilled it. This is the best.
Sounds amazing. Let's go.
A barrel.
I'm ready. Let's
You do a
go.
barrel, you distill
Can I
it.
have the next one? I'm ready.
Yeah.
And barrels are amazing because, again, once you get into this, you can go with something very simple, like go to Publix and ask them to hang on to their buckets after they use them for icing, and you don't have to buy anything.
I can't never get any. You got them already.
I got them all. Or you can buy the glass carboys. Again, you can tell people that like to get growlers and things like that. If they're willing to part with them, you'll take them off their hands. If you can get your hands on flip-top bottles, those are really handy, but I usually don't get those back. I don't know why, but I never get those back. And I always tell the person when I give it to them, if you give me this back, I'll give you more alcohol. And I still never get them back. I think they just like the bottle. But basically the equipment you need is something to heat water in. If you choose to heat the water, and we're going to talk about that in a second, you need something to brew in, and that could be a carboy or a bucket. You need something to wash everything with, whether you go with plain old dishwashing soap and water or a sanitizer that's made by a brewing company, and or bleach diluted to a certain amount, which usually you can find any of this information on the internet, so I'm not giving you anything specific, but if you need to know and you don't know, you're welcome to ask me. Just don't call after 11:59 p.m. Just kidding. The bottle brush is actually super handy, although they don't make ones that are small enough to clean really small, narrow openings, like the wine bottles themselves can be a real pain in the neck to clean sometimes. Eric bought the Star San, which he's going to pass around for you, and it is a really nice sanitizer. It's safe enough to prepare in the dilution that's recommended on the bottle. Pause. Starting to change. Still milky, but starting to bubble at the top. So you'll see that it's starting to grow a little bit. And we'll see, it'll change a little bit more before we add it to the batch, because we're going to be here all night. I have a couple more things here I want to talk about, but I want to pass around the next honey. Also multifloral, MF Spring Polyfloral. This one has, possibly likely identified by Rafaela, honeysuckle, white clover, and linden. Yum. Yum, yum, yum. I'm going to use the other end of my spoon, taste it and make sure it's okay for everybody.
You're using the same spoon?
The other end. The other side. This is the first side. This is, I promise.
Joking with you.
I'm not a double dipper.
What are you going to do with the third one?
I don't know yet. We'll figure that out when we get there. You'll see an airlock cap for a large carboy here and a small airlock. This is another style. This is a good one, actually. I like this one. I don't know how this little rubber stopper works. We find out from reading reviews online and buying all kinds of different things, which ones work and which ones don't. But Eric said a good tip for using this one if it doesn't stay in the bottle. Now, don't panic if you set this all up and you walk away and you come back and this thing fell out. It's okay. You can actually make a batch of mead just by putting everything in a bucket and leaving it out in the open and putting a little thin layer of cloth over the top and just let it do its thing. The cloth is just to keep bugs out, but it'll do its own thing. But this is going to guarantee less things can get in there and or nothing, because it's an airlock and it has water in it. You can put sanitizer mixed with water in the bubbler. You can put vodka in there if you want to waste vodka. Or you can put plain water in there. But basically, before we started, we mixed some of the sanitizer solution in a clean bucket, and we dunked this in there for a minute and then dumped it out. This is safe to use even with the little bit of sanitizer that's in there, but I'm a little bit of a freak and I don't like the sanitizer in there. So if somebody wants to rinse it out for me, whenever, no rush. We're not anywhere near the brewing point yet, just so you know. We're going to be here for a while. Corks. Here comes another little thing to pass around. This is a number 8 cork. This is a tea cork or a flanged cork. These, once they go in the bottle, are best left undisturbed. And for me, a lot of people like to turn their mead on its side. I like to stand it up. What do you do, Sam? You stand them up or lay them down? Whatever. Excellent answer. A little of both. Well, what happens if you leave it standing up, Jesse? The good news.
I've never had one dry out.
You haven't?
No.
Okay, so the thing that can happen is it can dry out. The other thing that can happen if you lay it down is I've seen them get moldy. I don't know why, but I've seen them get funky. And the other thing is when you lay them down, the mead, if it has any sediment left in it at all, is going to be kind of mixed on the side of the bottle. And when you stand it up, you're going to have to wait a little while if you care if the mead is clear. It's up to you guys. If you're entering mead in a show, you're going to want to rack the mead off several times till it's clear enough to enter in the show. So standing it up is helpful, and I'll give you another tip on that in a second. Question?
They recommend that you store your wine cork down, and that's because if there's fermentation, it'll gather on the back of the cork, so when you pull it out, you get the solids out of it with it.
I gotcha. That makes sense. The tea cork is good once you open it if you need to seal it for a short period of time. And some shows require these. So just kind of be familiar with what it is. If you see the words tea cork or flanged cork, you'll know what it is because we talked about it tonight. Yes?
Can you get it locally or you've got to go to the
Say that again?
Can you get it locally in stores?
So I haven't seen any good brewing supply places left around here. Have you guys?
Is the one like Cork?
Funky Buddha? Still has stuff?
They got really weird hours.
Okay.
They're more of a bar now than really. Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. Click Clicks, it's on its way. I usually order this stuff online now just because I'm short of time. I wish there was a cool brewing place that I could just knock on the door and get it.
Here's your next spoon.
Oh, thank you. You're the coolest. Thank you. Wow, you guys like this one. Awesome. Okay, so the other cork is a number 8. The typical 750 milliliter wine bottle can come punted, flat. It really just depends on what you like. But again, if you're entering shows, and I only throw this in there because, hint, hint, there's a show coming up in August at Bee College. Who's going? Who's entering Mead? You got none of you are going to Bee College?
We just heard about it.
Oh, you just found out about it. So what? Let's go. Bus. Let's rent a bus. Come on. Oh, man. You just bursted my bubble. I was like waiting for everybody to... Okay. I hope between now and then some of you will come. And also... Yes?
Send us the information, I'll send out a blast.
Okay. So, Bee College is in August. It's in Gainesville. If you haven't been to the lab, you're going to want to go. There's going to be lots of cool classes. And I'm going to be there. And we'll have mead. Anyway, if you guys start making mead, would you bring some to next year's Bee College and enter it in the honey show? Because it's not going to be any good between now and then anyway. Anybody want to say they'll do that? Anybody at all? All right. You guys are a tough crowd. Okay, so that's exactly what's happening. If I get to judge the mead, I get to taste it all, which is amazing. Okay, I think I covered most of this equipment except for the racking cane and the siphoning tube, which I'll tell you about. Eric, if you want to go to the next slide, you can. That's a carboy. That's a 6-gallon. You know, you'll find recipes for 1 gallon. You'll find recipes for 3. 3 is pretty common. 5 is super common. 6 is a little less common, but it's helpful because some of your meads are vigorous fermenters, and that little bit of extra headspace makes a big difference. I made a batch of jackfruit mead just a couple days ago, and I woke up in the morning and the airlock cap blew off across the room. The inside of the bubbler was on the floor and my pig was eating it, and there was jackfruit puree all over the place. It was pretty cool. It took me about an hour to clean up in between shots of espresso. Yes? Yes.
Use any water bottle, because we did that and it busted on us.
Yes, so you're going to deal with pressure in the fermentation process, so you need to use something that will withstand the pressure of the fermentation. And here's another tip. 5-gallon buckets are your friend. Just like Sharpies and tape, you can put a small carboy inside a bucket or a tote, just an inexpensive plastic tote, and if you have an explosion or a problem or an eruption, you can pretty much catch most of your mess. You can do it with your already bottled things too, for the very same reason. I ferment a lot of beverages, and some of them are carbonated on purpose, and those go in a plastic bucket in a cool place. Can I have the next slide, please? Sure.
In the floral, are the volumes of each floral about the same, or are they disproportionate?
Say that again?
In the floral, the different flowers in there, are they equal amounts, or are they disproportionate?
In the honey? It depends.
I mean, look at this one.
Oh, he didn't specify. Based on the taste, I taste the honeysuckle. I don't necessarily taste a lot of clover. So the second honey was, we got some honey fans out here. I like this. Honeysuckle, white clover, and linden. Linden is basswood. You had basswood before?
Usually takes the honeysuckle.
You taste the honeysuckle.
What's the first one?
The first honey that you had, that we passed around, sunflower and alfalfa. There's not a lot of sunflower in it. Sunflower, when it's really strong, you can smell and taste ammonia. It's really intense. Honeysuckle has a hay marker, like an actual hay marker, and I'm not getting the hay from that, but I'm not on my game right now, so we're just going to keep going. So we didn't talk about 2 pieces of equipment I want to mention, and then I'll move on. Siphon tubing, you can get food-grade tubing from wherever, Lowe's, Home Depot. The diameter of the tubing really isn't important unless you're using a cane, a siphon cane, to siphon out your mead. This is entirely up to you. There are people that make mead that put the tubing in their mouth, start the siphon, and then transfer. Once you get the siphon going, it's going to keep going if what you're siphoning from is up here and what you're siphoning into is down here. So again, be prepared. Have extra buckets on hand, because if you put all your wine bottles clean into the empty bucket and you spill mead all over the place, it's going to go probably in the bucket mostly. And if you need to break your siphon, all you have to do is bend the tubing. Now, if you want to get all fancy and buy a bunch of stuff, because you like to buy things, like me, you can buy, that was supposed to be funny, you can buy the racking cane with the siphon and get the tubing, and you can start it that way. It basically is a very dense, hard plastic cane that has a small piece of rubber on the bottom, fits nicely in the carboy. If you need a tip to learn how to do this as one person, if you don't have a friend on hand, you know those cool things that you open jars with when they're really hard to open, the little rubber things that everybody gives you for free and they have their logo on them? Those work really great. You can actually stuff that in there with the racking cane, and then your hands are free, because you have to pull that lever, that cane up and down 3 or 4 times to get your siphon going. So your tubing needs to fit snugly on the end of the cane. If it's not snug, you're going to get mead in your face and everywhere else. So make sure it fits snugly on there. If it doesn't, you can use a little clamp to hold it on there. And if you really want to, you can try tape. I haven't tried that, but I bet it'll work. So those.
They also have a little pinch thing that pinches your hose rather than kicking your hose.
So if you don't want to bend your hose, you can buy the cute little 50-cent clamp that holds the tubing shut. And it works pretty good, but it's not always easy to free with one hand. So if you're like holding the tubing in a bottle and you want to go to the next bottle, sometimes it's a little scary because the tubing takes up space. This is science, it's crazy. Takes up space with the liquid, and it displaces and you go to pick it up. It's a little tricky. It takes a little bit of practice. Don't drink a bunch of mead before you start. Drink the mead after you do this. So anyway, that's the fun part. This picture is completely unrelated to mead making, but I'm sharing it anyway. This is from a trip to Greece in 2016, and it's an allium flower that isn't open yet. So it's a cute little bee from Greece that I found when I was in Delphi at a sacred site, and it was unbelievable. If you haven't been to Greece, you should go. When I got there, When I got there, it was literally everything was buzzing on the island of Crete. I thought there were swarms everywhere. Nope, just normal activity, bees everywhere, always lots of noise. So I have to say it's a pretty fantastic place for... I wouldn't necessarily say that, Eric, but it's a pretty rough place. They have a hard time feeding the many, many people that live there. And they're like a small country and everybody wants what they have, so it's kind of tricky. All right, so may I have the next slide? That's another pretty picture for you to look at. Now the flower is open so you can see how pretty the allium flower is, how cool the sacred site was. And I'm gonna pass around the third honey, and I'm going to call it a honey because in Italy this is called a honey, and I'm not going to tell you too much more because you'll either get mad at me or you might not eat it. So I'll tell you after you eat it, but you have to promise me now you won't get mad at me. Everybody promise? Okay. All right. So.
Who's first?
All right, it's not going to hurt you.
Can it you?
Shh, 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 shh. Okay, I'm going to pass it around.
We're beekeepers, we'll eat it.
Nancy, I'm going to give you the cap. Oh, well, that's true. That's true. That was very uncustomary of me. Hang on, Joseph. Wait. I'm going to get an extra big helping. Hang on. With my clean paper plate.
Usually light.
Well, there's light and dark. I'll tell you this one in a minute. Hang on. Oh, that's good.
It's very special.
That's very good.
It's really a very special thing.
May I have the next slide, please?
It is.
Wow.
Yeah, where's your spoon?
I heard it, but
I don't have a spoon.
Okay, so I went a little overboard with the Greece pictures, but there's the sacred site in its entirety and the backdrop and the mountains and all that cool stuff. So you really should go. May I have the next slide, please? Oh, I included more. What a surprise. I feel like I'm taking you all to Greece right now. It was spectacular. I mean, look at that. That's unbelievable. It took us 8 hours to get there. I was so tired when I got there. May I have the next slide, please?
did you go to the island that produces honey? That's
Crete.
considered the best in the world?
Crete?
In Greece?
Yes.
You went to the
Yes. No, not, hang on. I had somebody in my honey sensory analysis from there. Cyprus. Cyprus or Crete?
I don't remember. It's in Greece.
Cyprus is very small.
They talked about this even on CNN.
The thyme honey? The thyme honey is from Crete.
I don't remember the name of the honey, but
Okay.
I know it's produced very little
Okay.
in the world, only in Greece.
Huh. Well, we'll have to find out. I don't know for sure. I want to say yes, but I could be wrong. Okay, so we went through all of this, but just to go over it again, because I know I'm going to miss something, and I did. All the things that you need, including something to work in, something to brew in. The hydrometer is on you guys if you would like one. It is a tool to measure the amount of alcohol right after you start making your mead, and then after it's already gone through the fermentation process, you take another reading and you can sort of get an idea of how dry or sweet it will be and approximately how much alcohol will be in there. I'm not a super technological mead maker, so I don't have a ton of experience with using a hydrometer, but I know it exists, so it's my duty to share that with you. A thermometer is handy. If you can't use your body temperature to gauge what you're doing, a thermometer is great. But for me, I usually, when I'm ready to pitch yeast, I usually go with like a body temperature, which is, 98 point something or other, and in my case, 82. Just kidding. But the yeasts are tolerant to a certain range, and you can actually look up the tolerance range of the yeast that you're using when you're brewing. So as long as you reconstitute it with a reasonable temperature water, and it's alive,
A lot of the labels have that temperature range
on the packet. Yep. So you can see this is even grown more. So there's now like this thick layer of bubbles and foam happening. So it's alive. It is alive. It's working. It's doing what it's supposed to. The airlock we talked about, the lid, the rubber stopper, the racking cane and siphon, and water. So this is just in reference to a 5-gallon batch, but you can, now that we're scaled down to a gallon, I'm using like a half of a gallon of water for this batch. 3 pounds of honey will make sort of a medium, not real sweet, not real dry mead. And if you're adding fruit, it'll be definitely medium, a little bit sweeter sometimes, depending on how much alcohol is produced. So I brought a little bit of awesome Florida-grown organic blueberries. And I've got them sort of defrosting in a little bit of water because they were frozen. Can I please have the next slide? What? Go ahead.
On the hydrometer, when you buy them, buy the tube with it, it's a kit. Don't buy just the hydrometer, because
You need the tube.
it's not very accurate to use the bottle to use the hydrometer.
Nobody asked me why the water has to be cold in the fridge. Somebody always asks me why the water has to be cold in the fridge. Somebody asked me. Thank you. So the water should be cold in the fridge if you're choosing to, A, heat your water, because when you make mead, you have a choice. The pasteurization process is up to you, but most recipes will recommend that you heat your honey to pasteurize it. I don't personally like to do that, but I will heat my water up to about 180, and then I'll turn it off and wait a little bit, and then I'll add my honey in. One of the reasons why I do that is it dissolves well. You're trying to get a whole bunch of sugar to dissolve and not so much water. And honey, as you know, most of you know, doesn't dissolve very easily in cold water. So if you end up working with something that's warmer than you'd like, and you don't have 8 hours to wait for it to cool down to your body temperature to pitch your yeast, you can then add the cold water, and then you'll be able to get it to the desired temperature easier.
Cold water has to be also like cold boiled water, or you can mix boiled water with...
Very good question. What water are you using to start with? Are you using something that's been boiled or distilled or spring? I personally love spring water. I feel like it has a good flavor. It's not too soft, not too hard. There's definitely things in it, minerals and other things, but usually they're pretty hyper-filtered nowadays. Distilled water I don't recommend because it's void of pretty much everything. And tap water I definitely don't recommend because it's like drinking out of the pool. But, no judgment. Whatever you have access to and whatever works for you is fine. If you do have tap water, you can put it in a blender and turn it on for a little while and get most of the chlorine at least out, and then it might be something that you want to use. But that's a good question, Joseph. Thank you. You can boil the water and let it cool down, or put it in the refrigerator if you feel like you need to heat it. But I've used spring water pretty regularly, and I don't heat it before I use it, and it usually works out fine.
What about like a Brita filter?
Sure. I think that's great. Okay, who wants to know what the honey was? Joseph knows what the honey was. Tell them, Joseph. Honeydew. Who knows what honeydew is? Anybody know what honeydew is? Joseph knows. Thank you. Aphid excrement. Anybody mad at me? So this honeydew is metcalfa, and so aphids will go to a plant and drink the nectar off the leaf, and then they'll excrete it, and then the bees will drink that. Thank you, Lee. Bring it back to the hive, and it is considered honey in lots of places. I think it's delicious. You still like me?
It's a big problem, honey.
Yes.
For the winter bees.
Yes.
For the bees that go into the winter.
Yes.
Big problem.
Big problem. Okay, so let's see what we can do now to make some mead together. Whoop, 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 whoop. Okay, so for this batch, I chose to heat water, which I have up here in my handy dandy Zora Ushi water boiler, which makes a fine cup of tea, I might add. They make these battery powered now. These things are awesome if you live off the grid or you're camping, but this one's a plug-in. So we've heated water, and I gotta keep it plugged in if it's gonna work. It'll sing to you when it's the right temperature. It already sang its song, so I know it's good. We have, what kind of honey do we have, Eric?
That one there is Brazilian pepper.
Oh, well, thank you. So we have 3 pounds of Brazilian pepper honey. And basically what we're going to do is put the honey and the boiled water together, which is what I would do in a large stock pot at home, rather right in the carboy, because it's a lot easier to mix other ingredients in, but just pretend like I'm using a stock pot. And I'm going to put all 3 pounds of honey in there. And I'm going to do it first because I can put the hot water into the plastic bottle when I'm done and get every little last drop of delicious honey out, and then put the water in there.
But the boiling water kills all the enzymes, kills all the goods, kills the pollen, everything kills.
I would agree that. I would agree with that. So again, it's up to you guys what you want to do when you make mead. I like mead natural, like without using the heat, but if you don't do that, there is an opportunity for off flavors. If you're looking for a show mead, you might not want to do that, but if you're just brewing for yourself, you might want to just let it be au naturel. And so you decide what you want to do. I'm not going to put boiling water in there, Joseph. I'm going to mix it with a little bit of tepid water first so it's more warm, but I still want to be able to dissolve the honey. So it's not going to be quite as hot as you would imagine. This is Brazilian pepper, isn't it?
Nice and yellow.
Mm-hmm. I can smell it.
What's cool about the pepper honey is the color comes through in the mead.
In the mead. Doesn't the color come through everywhere? Yellow wax, bright green neon yellow wax.
So on your blue tape,
Yes,
you would be writing today's date,
yes,
3 pounds of honey?
yes,
3 pounds of Brazilian pepper honey.
yes. Thank you, Lee. From Eric Baxter. Lee, you're hired. So I just mixed water with tepid water from the boiler, which was at 195, about half and half. And it's not too hot to the touch. So I'm going to say this is probably like 120 degrees. 115 degrees, you're still technically raw. Actually, 118 degrees, you're still technically raw. So I'm trying really hard not to kill everything. I would like to have all the natural stuff still in there. Yes?
Now, about the honey, can you use honey, good honey, but it has very high water content?
That's a good question. Very good question. Thank you so much for asking.
You need less yeast.
That's a point. Joseph said you need less yeast, and that's possible. But here's the thing, does the honey taste good?
Yes.
If the honey tastes good, then I would say, sure, why not? I ferment honey on purpose and then make mead out of it. But if it doesn't taste good, no, unfortunately.
Can you get sick by tasting honey? Is there such thing as honey that's gone bad?
I've never gotten sick. I've eaten some really funky stuff and I've never gotten sick. When you're fermenting, there's sometimes a layer on top that protects what's underneath. So if it's funky on top and you're comfortable scraping it off and getting a little taste without touching the sidewalls where all that stuff slimed up the side of the container.
You get that with kombucha.
With kombucha.
You get that.
Yes. So I'll tell you an interesting story about kombucha. My husband thought it would make a really awesome vegan chicken breast. It looks like chicken breast. It has the same texture. He cut it up into slivers, battered it up, and fried it, and made me try it. It was disgusting. It was one of the nastiest things I've ever eaten, ever. Over all the fermented weird honeys and stuff.
You're talking about the SCOBY, right?
Yeah, the SCOBY.
Yeah.
It looks like a chicken breast.
My
He's like, oh, that'd be good.
dehydrates it and gives it to her dog.
Oh my God, it was so disgusting. Okay, so I'm gonna pass this around. If you've been drinking mead, skip it when it comes to you. But I just want you to see what we did. It was very easy. It was not hard. I put honey in the jug. I mixed the hot water, half and half, in the same honey container with tepid water. And now if you feel this as it's going around, it's not much hotter than you. So we didn't kill everything. And the honey's pretty well dissolved. I mean, there's a little bit in there. Question?
Did you aim to fill up the bottle to a certain level, or how much?
Shake it as it comes to you. Do the dance. Yes, we're going to fill the bottle to the shoulder and leave the shoulder as it starts to narrow and neck open, and that's the head space that we want. So the recipe would call for something that would equate to about 1 gallon, and you're going to lose a little bit when you rack it off, because the yeast is going to grow, eat, do its happy dance, make alcohol, die, crash, sink to the bottom, leave sediment. So you can imagine about 1 inch of the bottom would all be filled up with the yeast and stuff at the end. And if you're using a fruit and you're not using a fruit juice, you have matter in there as well. In this case, we have, you can, like I brought the blueberries. I was going to use the hand blender and try to blend them up. I'm afraid they might spray all over the place and then we'll get kicked out for good. But I'm going to see how it goes. I'm going to do like the zzz, like zzz, and see if it isn't going to go all over the place, and then we'll go from there. But if you do use whole fruit, just realize that the fibers and skins and anything else involved in the fruit are going to affect the batch. So let's see what we can do with that. May I have the next slide, please? It's okay, don't rush. Hang on. Actually, pause. I changed my mind. Sorry. You're okay.
Have you ever made kombucha with honey? That's
June. Same thing, different SCOBY. June can do honey and not crap out. The kombucha SCOBY will crap out on just honey. It won't live. It'll die. So if you have ever made mead before or read a recipe for mead, you may have seen these things: yeast nutrient and yeast energizer. Honey alone does not necessarily have the nutrients it needs to sustain the yeast life cycle throughout the entire process. But that's where other natural ingredients could come in, and or the good quality honey with a lot of pollen and other things come in. So it can be done. It's not to say it can't be done. Again, if you're a little timid about making mead without having this little crutch of nutrients and energizer for your yeast so it's happy and fed, these are available to you, and you'll almost always find them in recipes. So I'm going to pass these around, and I'll get them back shortly because we're going to continue.
Are those going into that gallon?
Yes. So,
What is the name of it?
so we have
I can write it down.
YE for yeast energizer. Shorthand is really helpful with tape. And YN for yeast nutrient.
Okay.
In a 5-gallon batch, I would use 2 teaspoons of each for a standard mead recipe. For this, I'm going to go with 1/4 teaspoon. And I'm not measuring, I'm just going to dump. I'm also going to pass another book around to keep you all entertained. This one's called Make Mead Like a Viking. And in this book, you'll find more recipes, not using a lot of these added things. So, and they'll basically tell you need to go get a horn to drink your mead in. And if you get one, please order me one. I promise I'll pay you. I have a PayPal account. Okay. I'm going to try to make the blueberry puree without making a mess. You know what? No, I'm going to heed my own advice. I'm going to do it in the bucket. I'm going to use my brain cells that are still working.
Can he go back one slide?
Yes. Yes, can you go back a slide?
Back up,
Back up.
back it up.
Back it up.
Okay. Do you need more light?
No, I'm good. Thank you. Here we go.
1, 2, 3.
Woo! Wait, I think that's the, wait. Oh, here it is. Oh, good. It worked. Yep. Yep. So there's a lot of fiber in here, but I'm not going to strain the fiber out. I'm just going to leave it in there.
Okay.
Well, maybe I will strain it out. I'm undecided. Okay, the science experiment portion is over. We have blueberry water with skins, which I want to leave in there. I used approximately 1.5 cups of blueberries, and I added about 1.5 cups of water because they were frozen. All right, so we did the hot water, we removed it from heat, and now it's time to add the energizer and the nutrient, which you guys have. I might have to add show and tell. Ooh, thank you. I might have to add show and tell so we can actually get out of here sometime this evening. And a yeast check. Ooh, it's grown. It's doing good. It's happy. Very happy. There's an expiration date on your yeast when you buy it. It's infinitesimal. I have to use readers to see it. I may need to borrow that back from you guys. Can I have the Mead? I'm sorry. Do you really want to look at it? Go ahead. I'll hold it up before I take it back up to the front. Pass the Mead. Pass the Mead. It's looking good. Been shaken. It's all dissolved. So now we're going to add the yeast energizer and the yeast nutrient directly to the warm liquid because it'll dissolve easy because it's warm. And I already told you I wasn't going to measure.
Was it a quarter teaspoon each?
Quarter teaspoon each. Quarter teaspoon of that. And a quarter of a teaspoon of that. You did? Did you?
That's a teaspoon and a half for 1 gallon and a half a teaspoon for a whole gallon for the other one. Did blow off the lid or nothing, so I guess it's
It'll be okay. It'll be fine. So we've got that mixed up well. Now, can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Stir with a sanitized spoon or mix. We just gave it a good shake. Take a temperature reading. Now, we used a much cooler temperature water to make this, so we're way below 160. As a matter of fact, this is like just a little bit warmer than me. And I already told you I was 82, so it's really not that hot. I'm kidding. It's probably in the 90s, which is okay. This actually is pretty cold because the berries were frozen, so it would almost be too cold without some more warm water. So because of that, I'm going to make a decision now to add this and sort of check the temperature. What do you think? Should I leave the peel and matter in, or should I strain it out? I agree. Oh, wait, I heard a strain. Okay. Too late. It's in there. So when you go to rack this, you're going to need something to strain that out with. So you can get a really nice funnel like this that has a little space inside for a filter that I actually have that fits in there, and it came from a brewing supply place. But it's a really fine filter, and it doesn't always want to forgive those fibers. So you might find yourself scraping it with a spoon and dumping it from time to time, or cursing a little bit, or a little of both. So this is pretty well mixed. And I'm not terribly unhappy with the temperature. It's still pretty reasonably warm. It's not super cold. So I'm going to go ahead and add the extra water to the carboy. Where it says cold water, this is basically about room temperature. So now you're in control of deciding what it needs to be based on your recipe and based on the conditions of the ingredients, thank you, that you're working with. And this is where we pick up the recipe to the point where it needs to be, other than pitching the yeast. So you know you have approximately 1.5 cups of liquid here with what looks now like almost 2 inches of foam on top. This yeast is really going crazy. So I'm almost to the point where the shoulders are going to start coming in. So it's not a full gallon yet. A gallon is typically right at the base of where the neck starts to get straight in most containers, of course. I would love to hold it up.
Thank you.
Of course.
No left.
It's also not super mixed, so this would be a great time to mix it again. So I see a lot of water on top. Again, make sure you have a tight-fitting cap especially when working with blueberries and cranberries and turmeric and things that stain. This is another opportunity too for you to taste it. You know, you can taste for sweetness, you can taste for fruit, but you can also add different things at this stage. I like to add vanilla or ginger or spices. The other thing that a lot of people will add, dates, raisins. These things are dried naturally. Newman's Own, grapes dried naturally into raisins. They've got tons of yeast and good things on them. Does anybody want me to add a couple raisins? All right, doing it. So we're adding a little bit more sweetness and we're adding a little bit more complexity with fruit. I added 24.5 raisins, Lee. Just so you know. I just want to make sure we get that marked down properly.
Now, in all honesty, the 24.5 makes a difference from 30.
Yes. And it's only 24.5 because I ate one, half of one. All right, now I have here, did I bring it? A little metal strainer. Nope, I didn't bring it. Okay. So there's another thing that we want to add that I didn't mention yet. We talked about the honey, the water, the fruit, added spices, a little bit of extra dried fruit for natural yeasts and or other flavors. You know, dried fruit has a different flavor than fresh fruit. When I make jackfruit mead, I put a couple, like thick aren't as good as they used to be. I remember the days where there was lemons and grapefruits and things just kind of like laying all over on the ground rotten, and I would get a whole bag full of them for free. So it's not that cool anymore, but it's cool enough. I'm sure you can find a couple of lemons or limes. For this size batch, I'm going to go with a teaspoon of fresh lemon juice, lime juice, or if you have to buy that cute little plastic lemon, those are sometimes concentrated. So just be aware of that. Read it first, and if it's concentrated, use less. So I'm going to go ahead, lemon, and the reason I looked for the strainer was because I didn't want to add the seed because it's very bitter and it could impart the bitterness. The other thing that can happen if you go a little crazy, which I do sometimes, or a lot, you could add the whole lemon into the batch and you would get a lot more of the pithy, bitter, and or the rind flavor. So again, maybe you want to do it for a day and then take it out. You have all these wonderful opportunities ahead of you. But for tonight, we're going to go safe and we're just going to add the juice. Okay, so we've got covered honey, water, fruit, acid, and we're about to do something very exciting. This is a technical thing. So now you can tell your friends, I've pitched my yeast. So now we're gonna, in public, we're gonna give this one final mix, and we're gonna make sure the temperature is where we want it.
Aeration, aeration.
Yep, Eric's got it right. I'm gonna let everybody else do that. And we're gonna pitch our yeast. And what Eric was alluding to, I poured some, I swirled it. I don't want to lose any of that goodness in there. If I have to, I'll put a little water in the jar at the end just to get it all to come out. And there's a little bit of room in there, so I'm going to do it. Cap's already off. Yep. That's a happy looking batch of mead right there. So now, what do we need to do, Eric? Oxygenate. So this thing needs to be shook a lot. And it happens, it's better if there's air getting into it when you're doing it, but you can shake it, open it, shake it, open it. But basically you want to get everything moving around in there.
I've seen YouTube videos where they actually use air stones.
Oh,
Put air stones in their thing, let it run overnight. It's like
I want an old paint mixer. So oxygenate, and
make a little stainless steel one.
he's gone.
An old paint mixer.
So now you want to take a temperature reading. Now you want to make sure everything looks like it should. The head space is decent. If it's not, what can you do? If it's too high, you got to take some out. If it's too low, you have to add something in there. If you're adding water, you're going to be diluting the flavor. So if you've already tasted it and you liked it, It's going to be a little bit watered down if you add straight water, but you don't have to add straight water. You could mix honey and water together. You can get out some more blueberries. I mean, you can have a literal party and just recreate the whole thing just to top it off. You can also take marbles or stones or things that have been cleaned very well to eat up some of the headspace. So if you really need to, you can drop a couple things in there that bump the liquid level up. Question?
Aren't we missing a step here?
What's that?
Why don't you split the pass around so we can shake it?
You guys want to shake it? I'm going to start in the middle of the room because that's where we got to last time. I want to get the airlock on it though, so just pass it to the lady in peach over there. What's your name? Right there. Yeah. What is it?
Nora.
Hi, Nora. After you shake it and it gets down to the cool plant lady, can I have it back? What's your name? Melissa. Do you have any strawberry trees left? Okay. Can I go on a waiting list? So I tried strawberry tree honey in Italy too. It is the most bitter honey I've ever eaten, but it's amazing. I want to start a small strawberry tree farm for one beehive. Because that's what it's going to take. So now after it gets to Melissa, sorry, we're going to take it back up here and put the airlock on there. It should start bubbling in a couple hours. It can take up to 12 hours. If it gets any longer than that, something isn't right. You can add more yeast and water. That yeast had a very good liveliness to it, so I'm pretty confident in the yeast that I used. But if for some reason something happened, you can go ahead and add more. I wouldn't quite add as much as I added in the beginning.
See what I put up with?
Oh my gosh. But I would add some. So just to give you an idea, if we added a half a packet of yeast to a 1 gallon batch and it didn't get going, you could maybe try another quarter packet. We did 3/4 of a packet. We saved a quarter packet. If it doesn't get started, we'll add it. So you've got everything down now, right?
Yep.
Okay, you're awesome. So we're going to put the tape that Lee wrote on here and the airlock. And this headspace is a little low. You could easily fill this up a little more, but because it has fruit in it, it's likely to go a little crazy in the beginning.
So whoever does take this home, put it in a bucket.
Put it in a bucket. So
Shower, close the curtain.
I don't know if you hear any weird noises in the night, that's it. So I don't know if everybody got the memo.
This goes right across.
Yep. Thank you, Lee.
Can it blow up?
Yes. Yes.
Oops.
An awesome alternative to an airlock is, come on Sam, you know this. Balloon. If you don't have an airlock, you can use a balloon, a glove that you use in the kitchen to cook with, and some tape. You can pretty much find whatever you need laying around your house to make some awesome mead with, I'm sure of it. So after this thing gets going, and it's going to get going, it's going to stop. And it could take up to 2 weeks to stop, but it will slow down. So if you're like me, you listen to the sound and you're like, bloop, 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 bloop. Okay, it's really going. A couple days later, bloop, 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 and then you know it's on its way. And eventually you're like, oh, I don't hear. Oh, bloop. Oh, I guess bloop, you know. So eventually it's just about done. You don't have to wait for it to stop entirely, but if it's not done, and you rack it, it's going to continue to ferment. So it's best to wait for it to finish almost. And basically at that point, you're going to transfer it into another clean container. And you're going to do the best job you can with your siphon cane, siphon tube, or whatever you're using to leave the sediment behind. That's where the filter will come in for the skins from the fruit and the sediment that's at the bottom. If you move the carboy, put it where you want it when you're going to rack it when you make it. Does that sound good? I don't even know if I can say that again, so please try to do that. Put it where you want it. See, I told you I couldn't do it twice. Yes?
You don't serve a bottle once you set it up.
You won't, yes. You will not need to stir it. It's going to go crazy in there. You can watch it for hours. It's fun. Like moves around in there. Question?
But you should put it in a dark space, yes?
Dark is good, cool is good. Cold, not necessarily. 75 to 80 is a little cool. I don't use a lot of air conditioning. I live in like the 82 degree range. That's a little warm, and obviously outside, not good. And now,
Fluctuation in temperature is not good.
right,
You want a steady temperature.
70.
sort of, kind of. Fluctuation in temperature. Okay, we'll talk about that. 75 to 80 is a reasonable temperature range for me. Over that, it goes very fast. Basically, it's more active. It's going to peter out really quick. It's not going to necessarily affect it horribly if you're using a moderate yeast, but if you're using a really special yeast, it could not come out so good. Couple weeks is a nice range for a mead to settle down. Temperature changes. In many places, other than here, it actually gets cold. Cools down in the fall, gets cold in the winter. Well, a lot of fermented foods like that, like caves, like places where they make cheese and other regions of the world where things age. So, in my opinion, if it were up to me, I wish I could have a cave. I can't have a cave, but I can control the temperature environment that my mead is brewing in. So cool consistently is good. Over hot is not good, but it can benefit the mead if it ages in an environment where the temperatures change. So it does change as it ages. Mead in particular is known for getting better with time, indefinitely, as far as I know, if it's kept in a container that can keep the air out, whereas wine will eventually deteriorate. Takes a long time. I'm told, maybe because I'm impartial to mead, but I'm told mead will get better forever. So let's meet here again in 150 years and try this mead. See how it is. Just to finish up on can I have the next slide, please? On the racking. We talked a little bit about it early on with getting yourself in a stable, sort of good headspace, ready to do the job. Don't drink too much mead before you start. And if you have espresso, limit it to half a shot of decaf. Just be ready. Get all your equipment sanitized. Have a game plan. But don't freak out if it doesn't work. It's just a little batch of mead. You know, it's no big whoop-de-doo. Should be fun. But you're going to rack it off and try to leave the sediment and the particles from the fruit behind. That can stay in that secondary bottle for as long as you want with an airlock on it. You don't even have to ever put it in a wine bottle. You can just leave it like that if you want. At that point, the fermentation process should be basically done and it should be aging. It's pretty awful in the beginning to some people. High alcohol flavor, almost like rubbing alcohol. They call it new, young mead. Some meads are great right out of the gate. And if they are, man, you got a winner. Keep that tape. Don't let that tape go. Remember what you did. Go outside and look at the moon. Take a temperature reading. Look at yourself. Take a picture. You know, whatever you got to do to recreate the moment, because that's exciting. Question?
Yeah, so as far as making alcohol at home, I understand it's legal to do it for yourself, but you're not allowed to sell it. Is that what your understanding is?
That's correct.
Right.
You need a license.
Right.
Yes.
You can sell somebody the jar and that other stuff that's in it, you know, that just goes with it.
Question? Donate. I take a donation. Donations. Question?
You said that the mead is pretty much good, you know, forever.
Forever.
But if you started then drinking out of the bottle, is it still when you?
Good question.
How do you consume it after you've opened it to drink it?
Very good question. So we basically completed it. The only thing we didn't talk about was if you want to take a sample reading, you can with your hydrometer. May I have the next slide? We did all this. Next slide. Okay, we did all this too. I'm just going to let you click for a minute and answer this question. Keep going. I'll tell you if I need you to stop. Okay, stop. All right, go back one. Thank you. So remember the headspace. If you want to drink some of your mead, decant what you want to drink and put what's left in another bottle. Here's where extra bottles come into play. If you have a big bottle of mead and you like it, use your tape and date it. Did we date that?
Yes, we did.
Excellent. It's dated. We've captured this moment indefinitely. Next time you taste it, make notes. Write the date. If it's really good, pour some in a bottle, cork it, hide it on yourself, and tell everybody around you if they touch it, you're going to break one of their fingers. Just kidding. But do things like that, where you take readings, take tastes, make notes, and if you have something you really enjoy, trick yourself and make a little jar for each year. Wait till the next year, try it again. It's very hard to do. The first couple batches I made were amazing. I have none left. It's all gone. I'm not that smart yet, even still. I still mess up. So each time I do it, I'm hopeful that I'll remember to take a sample, put some away, keep some batches. The oldest mead I have of my own is only a couple years old. Somebody came in earlier. Nancy, do you know who brought the mead in earlier that's up here on the table? Because he told me you were taking it for him. His back hurt and he left. Andy, are you okay taking that mead for him? Are you okay taking that mead for him at the end of the class? Okay, so Andy brought 2 bottles of mead. Jesse will hold them up for you and show you. One of them is dated 1998. That's pretty awesome. We're not allowed to open them. That would have been more awesome. Yeah, you can tell. He said they got shook up on the way here. So, but that's an amazing example of somebody with so much patience that I would really like to hang out with him a little bit. So take samples, mark what you decided about it, and if it's delicious, keep little bottles of it to age longer. And if you have the luck of tasting it in that long away, that's cool. And if you have a mead party, please invite me. I'd like to come. Question?
Does anybody sell it commercially?
Yes. Commercial meaderies are popping up all over the place. It's a very popular thing right now to do. If any, I don't know.
Yeah, Whole Foods show.
Yeah.
Whole Foods.
Yeah, I would think Whole Foods, the Total Wines and More, you know. There's a Mead CSA. You can join and get 3 bottles a month. I forget where they are, but just use the interweb and you'll find some.
So don't go to the interweb.
For bottling, I highly recommend the corker on the right. It's a floor corker. It's worth the extra couple of bucks to get it. The hand corker is great if you like to sit Indian style and you have a lot of strength in your feet and you can hold your bottles still. Otherwise, they kind of like slip all over the place when you're trying to put the corks in. The floor corker is brilliant. One last thing I didn't tell you about. I'm lying, there's a whole bunch of stuff I didn't tell you about. But one thing I wanted to tell you about, I don't use this stuff, but I have it. It's called Campton. It's literally a sulfite. If you're making something with grapes, you're probably going to need this. It's hard to clear grape wine, even mead, because they have a lot of different components in the grapes and the skins and the yeasts. And some fruits yield a lot of pectins, peaches in particular, and apples. So if you're going to make a sizer or a mellow mel with peaches, you may want something to counteract the pectin, like a pectinase. Again, you can try to find natural things to do this, or you can use the nasty stuff and do it. But it's my duty to show you this.
What does the sulfite do?
The sulfites interact with the grapes already contain a natural sulfite, but these are used basically as a preservative. So it kind of inhibits bad yeasts and things that are off-putting when you're making it, but I don't typically use this stuff. Does anybody have any other questions? Do you feel like you could go home and make a batch of mead right now? Yeah? Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, and I can send this presentation to these guys and they can share it with everybody or put it on the website or whatever. But basically, I hope you feel like I covered everything that you would need to make a batch. So this batch is raffleable. Did they already put something out for it? Yes.
Now, when do you know it's done?
Okay.
Which contains the carboy and the airlock, and that's over there.
Okay. So before we break, and I say thank you for being here, and I don't even want to know what time it is. Thank you. All right. This batch is for raffle. And I would like to try it in a year, so whoever wins it, please take my card and call me. I want to know how it is. And then, as Eric just said, there's a kit over here of a carboy, an airlock, a packet of yeast, and 3 pounds of honey. So you can go home and make a batch with the kit, and those are both for raffle. If you have any questions, I'm not going anywhere.